When I first started using Airtable, I thought it was just a more hipster version of Google Sheets. I was so confused why anyone was using Airtable over Google Sheets for anything. Then, after a week of using Airtable, I realized that my first impression of it was completely wrong. Airtable and Google Sheets are completely different tools, and there's a time and a place for each of them. So in this video, we're going to cover how they're similar, how they're different, and actually when to use them for different use cases. Let's start with how Airtable and Google Sheets are similar. And the number one similarity is that they both have the same or similar base structure. And what I mean by that is they both use a spreadsheet or table structure to get started. Now, Airtable has a lot of different things we'll get into later in this video, but both Google Sheets and Airtable are based off of a spreadsheet look. Now, that's really helpful if you like to organize through that, and both of them can do that really effectively. The number two reason how they're similar is they both can connect to a whole slew of tools. Now, the number one way they can do that is using Zapier, but also you can actually build no-code tools with Glide and Softer using Google Sheets or Airtable. So whichever you're most comfortable with, you can build no-code apps, fully functioning software apps with both of those tools. And additionally, Google Forms works with both of those tools. So if you have an intake form or want to use Google Forms over Airtable Forms, you can use Google Forms with either of them. They both work with Google Forms. Reason number three in how they're similar is security. Now, I am by no means a cybersecurity expert, but both should be viable for most businesses and organizations for cybersecurity. Airtable and Google Sheets both support single sign-on and have similar sharing capabilities. Okay, that is how they are similar. Let's jump into how they are now different. And there's a lot of different ways we can go with this because, again, they are very different tools. They might look like similar tools from the surface, and they are in some ways, but in a lot of ways, they are very, very different tools. So I'm going to break this section of differences down into three parts. One is how you view data, two is the automations, and then three is how you process data. Now, viewing data in Airtable and Google Sheets is quite a bit different. And yes, there is this space spreadsheet table view for both of them, but for Airtable, those views are much more complicated. You can have a spreadsheet view like we've talked about, you can have a gallery view, you can have a Kanban view, and you can even hide things and filter things and have all these different views depending on what you are working on. So it's all the same data, but you can view it differently and hide things and depending on your different workflows and your operations. For Google Sheets, there's just one view. It's just a simple spreadsheet. You can hide columns, but you can't hide particular data points necessarily. So Airtable, you win that one in the viewability. It's much more complex and useful for most people with that. Okay, number two is the automations. Now, we mentioned that both of these tools, you can use automations, you can use Zapier with it, which is great. The difference though is Airtable actually has a lot of internal automations, and those internal automations have been growing steadily. Now you can do automations within your Airtable bases without using Zapier and connect it to tools like Google Sheets or any of the G Suite products. You can connect it just with internal automations within Airtable. For Google Sheets, you always need to use Zapier with it. You can't just build the automation within Google Sheets. You always need to have Zapier on top of it. And the third main reason how Airtable and Google Sheets are different is data processing. Now, if you have a lot of complex data, or maybe you want to manage your KPIs or your analytics, Airtable is really wonderful at that because you can put all that data into Airtable. You can view it in different views and galleries and different table views, however you'd like to do that. And also there's the apps and the interfaces function, which are on top of all your data. It's still internal to Airtable, but it has these really beautiful graphs and these apps that can lay on top of it so you can view it and also see it how it's changing live. Now for Google Sheets, yes, there's internal charts that you can use, but they're not as clean as Airtable. And if you have a lot of complex data, Google Sheets isn't going to do that as effectively. It's really great for simple processes. I will say though, Google Sheets has a much better formulas functions in Google Sheets and just more complex. There's more functions available. Whereas Airtable, if you're going to maybe do some simple calculations, Airtable can do those, but if you're gonna do some more complexity ones, like for maybe financial modeling, Google Sheets has the one up there. With similarities and differences now out of the way, let's get into when to actually use Airtable versus Google Sheets. Now, for Airtable, it is built for operations and workflow management. So if you have a really complex workflow structure, or maybe your team is growing and you want to simplify communications, Airtable can do that really effectively, especially with these automations that are built internally to Airtable. So maybe you're managing events, maybe you're managing a content calendar, and you have a lot of different Slack messages handing off. Because of that, Airtable can help simplify that process and make communication much smoother. That's what Airtable is built for. Now, for Google Sheets is really wonderful for numbers, whereas Airtable can do numbers and data processing, but you're never going to build a financial model in Airtable. That's not what it's built for. You would build a financial model or a budget in Google Sheets. That works really effectively, especially if you want to get more complicated with the formula features of Google Sheets. Now, you can do some basic operation workflows in Google Sheets, but I would keep them really simple. You can't really do complex operations or workflows in Google Sheets without telling yourself I should be in Airtable. Now you can build some of that with Zapier and things like that, but it's just not worth it. Go to Airtable if you're gonna use it for operations or workflows. The last thing I want to mention in this section is that if you have a team that's not very techy and just getting started with operations and using tech for it, you probably want to start with Google Sheets. It has a lower of a learning curve, and if you go straight to Airtable, that learning curve can be pretty steep, especially for those that are not very techy. And if they have a bad experience right out of the gate, it makes it really hard to build your operations with tech and get everyone bought in to new processes using Airtable or Google Sheets. Google Sheets has a much lower learning curve with it, so I highly recommend getting started with it because you can always transition from Google Sheets to Airtable as your team gets more used to using tools like Airtable and Google Sheets. Hopefully this video proves that Airtable and Google Sheets are very different tools. Can they have similar use cases? Sure. But typically Airtable and Google Sheets have different use cases, and there's a time and place to use each of them. Now, if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more Airtable content, check out the rest of the videos on this channel.